You talked about how outsiders have never been more in than the Trump administration, and that's basically because of the really close relationship between the finance market and the real estate market. Can you explain that for me?
Sure. The key to understanding Trump is that he's a real estate developer. And the way a real estate developer makes money is by having enormously close political connections. You get the zoning change, your property goes up in value by thousands of a percent sometime. So they're not outsiders. They are inside players, major political contributions, and they're very dependent on finance and banking. So they're not outsiders to finance, and that means that the people in power are not the outsiders, even if they voted for Trump. The person in power and the cabinet he puts in, these are the quintessential insiders.
You were also talking about one of the major players that we don't really know about, which are hedge funds, and how they influence the political reality and the economic reality of the US and other countries. Can you expand a bit more on that?
Yeah, this was a real learning experience for me because I talked about the Mercers and I looked around the room and it was clear nobody had ever heard of the Mercers. So they are the biggest single funders of Trump. And beyond that, they intervened in his campaign when it was not going well. They're the people that brought in Bannon and Kellyanne Conway, the key advisors, and this is the very disturbing alt-right, they call it in the United States context. Don't like Muslims, things like that. So these people are known in America, but apparently outside of America, people simply have not heard. So again, they're not divorced. The Trump is not divorced from finance. He's funded by finance.
And one last point on how all of these different political, I'm not going to say turmoils because I'm not sure that's the right word across the Western world particularly. How much is that going to have an impact on the world of finance and banking? Or is banking and finance more resilient and it'll eventually just ride it out?
So in the financial crisis that we all went through recently, in the United States alone, the lost GDP over the course of the recession and recovery is estimated at $24.3 trillion. In American English, a trillion is 1,000 billion, and a billion's 1,000 million. So it's a really unbelievably large number. Almost 10 million Americans lost their jobs. Almost 5 million American jobs that would have been created were not created. And all of those numbers I've given you are bigger in the EU, substantially bigger in the EU. So this is an immensely traumatic event, and the loss hasn't been evenly spread. So, for example, if you were a middle-aged head of your household, and you had a 2-year or a 4-year post high school, we call it, degree. So this is college, basically. And you were white, you're on average, would have lost about 33% of your wealth because of this recession. So that's a big deal. But if you were black, that number would be 85% in the United States. And if you were Hispanic, that number would be 83% or thereabouts. So the losses to particular subgroups who tried to do exactly what everyone told them. What do you need to do to be a responsible adult? Well, go get a university degree. What do you do as a responsible adult with a university degree? You buy a home, and you raise a family and such. The loss has been catastrophic, and we can't afford the next crisis. And right now, we are building towards the next crisis, and it likely would be worse.
I know I said my last question, but I just came up with a different one. I'm sorry. A lot of these things come, like PPI, from a lack of literacy in how the finance world works and people buying into things that they don't really understand. How much of that responsibility falls on the shoulders of banks to make sure people understand what they're getting into?
None, because you can't trust the bank to do something that would hurt its ability to sell the product that's producing all the profit. They're not going to do that, right? If they're going to sell a product like payment protection insurance, PPI, which absolutely should never be sold to anybody, right? It's a complete ripoff, 500% profit margins and such, just absolutely obscene. Worse than that, the regulatory agencies tended to say, oh, I know, it's just a problem of financial literacy. So we'll put a page on our web that says, you should learn about doing things, and maybe we'll even have a link. Everything we know from economics, from finance, from psychology says that not only doesn't work, it cannot possibly work. And the idea that we would, say in the UK context, train 80 million people to be financially sophisticated rather than train 12 bank CEOs to stop engaging in this predation is absurd, right? One's a whole lot more effective and cheaper than the other. So let's go after the CEOs and not try to blame this on your grandma who, it ain't going to happen.